A mini drash. it, but I too am in the groove of the flow of the music, and appropriately so. You know, when pilgrims would come to Jerusalem in order to bring an offering and come close to this experience of engagement with belonging to community and the holy experience of God's presence, there were 15 steps that were climbed, and you can visit those steps if you go to Jerusalem today. They've uncovered in the archaeological dig on top, right in front of the mosques, the huge steps, and each of those 15 steps had a separate psalm. For as people began to go up la'alot, physically, it was also music and psalms that elevated them. And when they reached the top, there was an orchestra. The Levites would sing. And it wasn't just on weekdays. Of the 150 psalms, only one of them is identified with the day of the week. That's Psalm 92 that we sang tonight, the Psalm of Shabbat. The rabbis would later appoint different days for different psalms, but the only one with the inscription of a day, Psalm 92. And here we're told, it is good to thank you, Adonai, to sing your name most high, to proclaim your love at daybreak, your faithfulness each night. Finger the lute, pluck the harp, let the sound of the lyre rise up. It is through song that we are elevated. It's not only the sound that goes up, but we go up. Which brings us to our Torah reading. The people were very elevated. They were standing at Mount Sinai and had a unique moment in religious history as self-identified, in Jewish history as the Bible recounts. As the people gathered as a community, shoulder to shoulder, after a sound and light show, there was Dolby put on to the sound, and then God's voice, hearing of the 10 Commandments, which left them with a dilemma in our Torah readings. How do you leave this moment of epiphany? How do you leave the presence of God? How, when you're so elevated, can you go forward? And so our Torah reading this week, Parshat Terumah, says, V'asuli mikdash v'shachanti betocham. Craft for me a dwelling place, and I will be among you. And the rabbis emphasize that it doesn't say that God will dwell in this little portable tabernacle. It says, I will dwell among you. When you as a community create holy space, crafted to honor me, you will become a community by your joint efforts, and I will be among you. Some 33 years ago, I had the privilege to hear Rabbi Stuart Vogel, not yet rabbi, give his senior sermon. And he spoke about this parsha. He spoke about ways in which, it was that good a sermon that I still remember it. It's not on my laptop. That was before we had such opportunities. I have a hard copy in my file, in which Rabbi Vogel, for his senior sermon, talked about that tabernacle that was constructed and how it's related to our synagogue today. You see, to leave Mount Sinai, they need a portable Mount Sinai. It had 3 concentric circles. Only Moses went to the top, then the leaders, the priests at the base, and the people around the mountain. And so in the tabernacle, it was only the high priest who entered into the Holy of Holies, just like Moses had gone up. The priests were the only ones into the tabernacle itself, but the people, they gathered in the courtyard. And now I pause to acknowledge how wonderful it is for me to look at the participants, to see so many familiar names from Congregation B'nai Israel, and so many other names from Temple Aliyah, and to again just have this sense back to Mount Sinai of being shoulder to shoulder experiencing a holy moment, of welcoming the Sabbath with such beautiful singing. And so, in order to leave Mount Sinai, they needed a portable tabernacle. And that tabernacle then became later in Jerusalem the great temple, the first and the second temple. And that was the focus for Rabbi Vogel. After the temple was destroyed, how did that next phase occur? And what occurred was continuity and change. That when we are in our sacred space of our respective synagogues and we look up above the ark and we see the Ner Tamid, the perpetual light, that reminds us of the temple's fire that burned perpetually. And when we open our ark, that reminds us of the Aron HaKodesh, the tabernacle that is described in the building of this Mishkan in which the Ten Commandments were stored. But for us, when we open that ark, we're both reminded of Mount Sinai and we're reminded of the Mishkan. And when we open the Torah and we put it on the shulchan, the table, that reminds us of how in the tabernacle and then later in the temple, how offerings were brought. And the rabbis will say that when we read about the offerings, when we open up the Torah on the shulchan, it's as if we are bringing the offerings in that moment as well. And so I have used that sermon, Rabbi Vogel, of yours through the years as my reminder of continuity and change, of how we as a people had this privilege of gathering and being at Mount Sinai, creating a Mishkan, creating a temple, and now creating our own holy spaces. Like this moment, here's a dramatic change. We are not identified tonight by our walls. We all are interconnected. It's such a treat as I look at the screen to be invited into your homes and for you to be in my home. We are connected by a shared focus. And a large part of that focus that we share in creating a holy gathering is the beautiful music. And so I too want to pay tribute to Debbie Friedman, that great contributor to holiness in our midst. She, by the way, is buried in Orange County at Harbor Lawn, and her headstone is shaped like a guitar. I called my teacher today, Rabbi Jack Reamer, who was the first to call me and say, you know, Debbie Friedman has moved to Orange County. Give her a call so you can befriend her. In fact, we had a date scheduled to walk our dogs on the beach, but she died the week before. Unfortunately, she died too young and too fast. But she managed to record 20 albums in her lifetime and to make such an impact. So I called my friend Rabbi Reamer in Florida and I said, what can you tell me about Debbie Friedman on her 10th yurtzeit I'm going to be sharing tonight? And he said, you know, before Debbie Friedman, non-Orthodox synagogues, if they had a musical instrument, it was the organ. And the organ was identified with awe. Often the organ was even literally in the loft. And when you would hear the organ, you would listen respectfully, quietly, passively. Debbie Friedman, he said, made her impact through camps with her guitar, with an instrument that called people to join her in song. And when those young people went back from that intense Jewish experience of summer camp, they wanted to keep singing. They wanted that guitar so that they too could have that musical guide and the sound and the beauty to join in voice. He said she transformed synagogues not just musically, but it was her guitar that led to participation in newfound ways. I called another friend to see if I could get a story from her. So I called my cantor friend, Shula Kalir Merton. And what she said of Debbie Friedman, who was her friend, is she had a distinctive quality of heart to know how to compose music that touched the heart. to create melodies. You know how many of the melodies that are second nature to us? The melodies we sing at Havdalah is a Debbie Friedman melody. The melody often used for Misha Berachs when we take the time to sing it. That too is a Debbie Friedman melody. She so often is part of our holy gatherings in ways that, frankly, many of us are even unaware, because music has wings. Music not only uplifts us, but when somebody writes a musical song and puts words to it, it has a life of its own. It then becomes its own. And so Debbie Friedman, 10 years later, continues to touch our heart, continues to elevate us. And we know from that Mishkan, all the roles and responsibilities will now be described. And the Levites, they were the singers, because you needed song, you needed even the instruments in order to go from regular space to holy space. Closing little story. A man comes to a rabbi and he says, "Rabbi, if God is everywhere, I can pray to God anywhere. Why should I go to synagogue? Why should I gather with a siddur?" And the rabbi said, "Yes, it's true. God is the same everywhere, but we are not." And so tonight, we have the privilege, with the beautiful singing and music and my sharing with my beloved friend, Rabbi Vogel, and with each other, to share focus, to share words that echo across generations and more, to share familiar musical notes and newfound musical chords and styles that eclectically remind us of how music elevates us toward Shabbat, how music elevates us into sacred space. And that space is, as in this moment, wherever we are focused together. Ribono Shalom, Master of the Universe, when we finish this service, may the sounds we have shared continue to resonate within us. And in doing so, may the holiness of Shabbat continue to be with us as elevated holy time. Amen.